us many promises, more than I can remember. They never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it.
In 1492, Christopher Columbus reached the Americas. Soon after, ships carrying explorers and settlers crossed the Atlantic to the Americas. The land was new to the Europeans, but to the many Native Americans already living here, it was home. Sometimes settlers and Native Americans coexisted peacefully, helping each other when they needed to. Often, though, the two groups fought over control of the land. The last stage of the struggle for land came in the middle and end of the 19th century. After the Civil War, settlers began pushing onto the Great Plains. This led to a new conflict between Native Americans and whites. There were many Native American groups that lived on the Great Plains. Among them were the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Comanche. These groups had a unique way of life that mainly depended on one animal, the buffalo. Buffalo provided meat for food, hide for shelter, and fur for clothing. Native Americans even used the bones for tools and jewelry. They did not waste any part of the animal because their religion and culture demanded respect for nature. They also preserved the herds of buffalo, only killing the number of animals they needed for survival. As the buffalo herds migrated, the Native American groups followed, so they always had access to life's essentials. Because of this, the groups were nomadic, though each stayed within certain parts of the Great Plains. The Sioux lived in parts of what is now Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, and Canada. The Sioux had three major divisions: the Dakota in the eastern part of their range, the Nakota in the center, and the Lakota in the west. The Sioux and other Plains groups practiced a traditional religious dance called the Sun Dance. This summertime ceremony could last anywhere from 2 to 8 days and was a way for the people to get closer, spiritually, to their universe. The ritual included fasting and performing various dances. The Cheyenne were another Plains group split into larger divisions. The Northern Cheyenne occupied land along the North Platte River, which runs through northern Colorado and southeast Wyoming into western Nebraska. The Southern Cheyenne lived along the upper Arkansas River, which starts in central Colorado and runs southeast toward the Mississippi. Like the Cheyenne, the Comanche lived in parts of Colorado, though they also ranged into Kansas, Oklahoma, and northern Texas. The Comanche also were nomadic and hunted buffalo. As settlers began moving onto the plains, various Native American groups handled the pioneers differently. Some were friendly toward them, others were hostile, and still others were indifferent. The government moved to limit Native Americans to certain areas, hoping that would reduce problems between them and whites. In an 1868 treaty with the United States government, the Sioux were guaranteed that they could live in what is now South Dakota. A few years later, though, gold was discovered on the Sioux's land. Whites quickly moved onto the land despite the treaty. Chiefs like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse were angered and staged a revolt. In 1876, Colonel George A. Custer led a force of over 200 cavalry troopers to attack a Native American camp on the Little Bighorn River. The Sioux, joined by many fighters from the Northern Cheyenne, outnumbered the soldiers. In a brief but furious fight, Custer and all his men were killed. When the U.S. Army learned of the battle, it sent many more troops to attack the Native Americans. After several fights, many of the Sioux surrendered and agreed to return to the reservation. Sitting Bull led some of his followers to Canada in hopes of pursuing their way of life there in peace. Some whites wanted to help Native Americans by changing them. Senator Henry Dawes of Massachusetts believed he was helping Native Americans with an 1887 law called the Dawes Act. The law forced Native Americans to adopt white culture. Dawes and others believed that this would improve the lives of Native Americans and reduce hostility between them and whites. Many Native Americans stopped wearing their traditional clothing and practicing their religions. Native American men were forced to cut their long hair to meet the standards of white settlers. The Dawes Act also broke up the reservations, divided the land among all the members of a group, and made any remaining land available for sale to whites. Native Americans were given farming tools and seeds and told to farm the land as white settlers did. These changes did not help the Native Americans assimilate, however. Many whites were still prejudiced against them. At the same time, many Great Plains groups resisted assimilation. Wovoka, a member of the Paiute people, taught a ritual called the Ghost Dance to some of the Lakota Sioux. The Ghost Dance was supposed to be a way to contact ancestors. It also gave the participants visions of a promised land. Those who took part danced 5 nights in a row, and on the last day they danced straight through to morning. Many dancers shook and convulsed, entering a hypnotic state. The rapid spread of this ritual alarmed the government. Officials thought the dance was threatening and a sign of revolution. They banned the dance in 1890 and sent army troops to the reservations to stop the practice. One contingent of federal cavalry met a large group of Sioux at a place called Wounded Knee. When a rifle went off, the soldiers opened fire, killing more than 200 Native Americans, including old people, women, and children. The massacre marked the end of the fighting on the plains. The movement of settlers onto the Great Plains had a disastrous effect on Native Americans. War, disease, and starvation killed thousands of people. Those who survived were forced to move onto reservations, where the lives they led differed from the ways of their parents and grandparents. Still, many Native Americans worked to keep their traditions alive, traditions that are still followed today by their descendants. What does the Native American mean in saying that whites never kept but one promise? Why did the U.S. government encourage Native Americans to assimilate into white society?